brand new reporting today that reveals that, believe it or not, and I know you'll believe it, there's more classified documents in the ex-president's possession, this time at a Trump storage unit in Florida. The news only adds to what we know about the ex-president's relentless and vast efforts to keep documents that do not belong to him. It comes even after his lawyers signed a statement declaring there were no classified documents left, and even after the high-profile FBI search of Mar-a-Lago found that not to be the case. From the Washington Post reporting, they were first to report on these documents. Quote, lawyers for former President Trump found at least 2 items marked classified after an outside team hired by Trump searched a storage unit in West Palm Beach, Florida, used by the former president. That's according to people familiar with the matter. Those items were immediately turned over to the FBI, according to those people. The search was one of at least 3 searches conducted by an outside team of his properties for classified materials in recent weeks after they were pressed by a federal judge to attest that they have fully complied with the May grand jury subpoena to turn over all materials bearing classified markings. Joining us now, one of the reporters who broke that story, Jackie Alemany, Washington Post Congressional Investigations reporter, also an MSNBC contributor. Mary and Michael are still with us. Jackie, most Americans are digging through storage units and drawers looking for gloves and winter hats and Christmas decorations. Donald Trump's lawyers are looking for state secrets. Take us through your reporting.
Yeah, Nicole, this unusual set of circumstances between the Justice Department, the Trump legal team, and the D.C. Circuit Court ultimately culminated in these searches conducted by an outside firm that was hired by Trump's lawyers after a judge ordered them to fully comply with the May subpoena that the Department of Justice originally issued in order to try to get back these classified documents that they knew were in the possession of former President Donald Trump. This came after prosecutors and Jay Bratt, he is the head of counterintelligence, who has been really running point up until Jack Smith's appointment on the investigation, had consistently repeated their concerns that the former president had yet to return all of these classified documents, and that they were worried that the search for the documents wasn't done as diligently as they would have liked. That ended up with, again, the former president's legal team hiring this firm. They first conducted a search at Bedminster. They attested to Judge Howell that they didn't find any documents there. They then conducted an additional search during the week of Thanksgiving at Trump Tower, and the most recent search being the search of this storage facility unit in Palm Beach, where they found 2 items with classified markings, immediately returned them to the Justice Department, but does, I think, sort of capture the mistrust here and the breakdown of trust between prosecutors and the Trump legal team as they seek to get to the bottom of this and ensure that the Trump legal team is fully complying with all these court orders.
I mean, Michael Steele, it seems that you'll never get that. I mean, Trump has confessed to almost all aspects of the crime. He's confessed to taking the documents, to not classifying them, and to saying they're mine, I'm keeping them. I mean, the whole, I wonder what you think of the asymmetry of American law enforcement trying to get back something that Trump thinks is his. Of course there's more. There's probably stuff shoved in his sock drawer, too.
You're talking about the stuff that's stuffed in a sock drawer. I'm talking about the stuff that's in the hands of our adversaries that he's already given to people, that he's already, I mean, that's not outside the realm of possibility, if not probability here. This whole narrative from the very moment this story broke, culminating to this point in Jackie's reporting, just tells you how beneath the surface of all of this, you have the law enforcement feature, you have the Justice Department, you have lawyers all doing their thing. And Donald Trump beneath the surface just going along and saying, these are mine, I can do what I want with them. And there's, no matter how much you tell him that's not the case, he doesn't believe it, nor does he accept it. So that means, to me at least, there needs to be probably a more aggressive and broader review of what the possible storage places are, not just at Mar-a-Lago, in his New York place, the place here in Virginia, wherever Trump may have laid his head. you're bound to find a document or two at this point. So I think all of this just tells us that there's more going on here. There's going to be more discoveries. And unless those documents have already been dispensed with in some form or fashion, it really begs the question, what on earth made you think you would keep these documents in the first place? Why did you think you need them? And the only logical conclusion one can come to is, well, you had other plans for these documents. And that's going to require a whole nother level of conversation and discovery once we figure out that we've got everything, if we ever get everything.
Mary, I think there was a sense, because this court-approved search happened right at the end of the summer's public hearings for the January 6th Select Committee, where their intention was to put into the public arena all the evidence of Trump's criminality, culpability, and state of mind in terms of plotting to overturn the results of an election he lost. And this investigation was always presented as far more straightforward. What does it say that they're still looking? What does it indicate about the phase of the investigation that they're still dealing with Trump's legal team and still looking for classified material?
Yeah, well, I think, remember, ever since the beginning, there's been two pieces of this. There's been the criminal investigation to just, determine whether there's evidence sufficient to establish an actual Espionage Act violation for the mishandling of classified information or obstruction of an investigation. But there's also been the intelligence review. And I think that, what this shows is there is a continued nervousness among our national security officials that they have tabs on all the potential classified information that may be improperly stored, or, as Michael said, potentially even, be in the hands of adversaries. Now, I don't have anything, we haven't seen evidence of that yet, but I think when we still see the Justice Department coming back to the court, and the court they're coming back to is the chief judge here in the District of Columbia, where that subpoena, that May subpoena, was issued by a grand jury here in the District of Columbia. This is not a judge in Florida. When the Justice Department keeps coming back and asking her to press the Trump team to look more, and she is pressing them, to me that signals concern among our national security, infrastructure, that they are worried about where other documents might be. And so I think they're really trying to get to the bottom of this. And of course, that could also lead to additional evidence of the criminal charges, but they just can't be certain that they have gotten everything.
And Mary, that makes a whole lot of sense as part of the national security review, and there's now been enough time to perhaps pick up chatter from places and ask questions about where certain information comes from. And we don't know what we don't know on that front. But on the obstruction front, it's very clear that the lawyers now, I think it's Christina Bobb, who had some exposure for attesting to not having any classified documents. Is some of this building out or further probing the obstruction case as well?
I think it certainly is, right? And it remains to be seen sort of what level of knowledge about what was in the storage unit, who had what level of knowledge about what was in the storage unit. So clearly, if GSA was involved with, that's the General Service Administration, a branch of the government, was involved with Trump's people in renting the storage unit for there to be certain documents from, I think it was from an office in Virginia, that leads one to think, okay, well, why was there ever anything in any classified information in an office in Virginia to begin with, right? Classified information has to be specially handled. And we know, we've now known for a long time that former President Trump, completely disregarded all of the carefully crafted, laws and regulations applicable to our national defense and our national secrets and classified information. And, we know he was aware of it. There's no way you could be the president and not be aware of it. We also know that his attorneys told him about it, yet still we see documents that apparently used to be in some office in Virginia, had no business being there, and now are in some storage unit in Florida. So I think a piece of this will also be what did he or those within his orbit know about this, and what was intentional, and was any of this done, intentionally to obstruct? That's unclear at this point. I also think that, Bob has, as you said, has got some culpability. And this firm that was hired, I would think they'd be trying to be very, very careful about how they do their search, right? So that they don't get themselves into legal jeopardy as well.